and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's. My name is the Reverend Peter Thompson. I'm the Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here, and I'm delighted to be joined this morning by the Reverend Curtis Hart. Kurt is a priest in our diocese. He serves the Church of Crucifixion in Harlem. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Religion and Health. He's a lecturer at Weill Cornell Medical College. He's the chair of the Ecumenical and Interfaith Commission here in the diocese. And he also served for many years as the director of pastoral care and education at New York Presbyterian Hospital. And we're very glad that he is back with St. Bart's. He apparently was last with us for the forum in 1998, over 20 years ago, to talk about the ethics of cloning. And he was also married at St. Bart's, which is it's a fun part, a connection to our history. And we're so glad that he's here this morning to talk to us about medical ethics, particularly when the field of medicine is in such a spotlight right now. Thanks so much for being with us, Kurt.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I'm very glad to be able to make my entrance, and happy Mother's Day to all who are observing, even out there where we can't see each other directly, but knowing how important that is for all of us. But my objective this morning the title talk is, Whose Choice Is It? Reflections on Vocation, the Teaching and Learning of Medical Ethics. Now, I need to tell you that I'm going to begin with an introduction and some remarks, and then pass on forward to the three major areas of my talk this morning. But what I'm going to do is probably take something of a novel approach in that I'm going to use my own personal narrative describing how my role in teaching medical ethics and reviewing medical research protocols arose and became fabric of my expression of my calling into the priesthood. Now, again, as I've said, this may seem novel to many of you, but it seems to make sense with what we are all dealing with at this time. Because many of us ask this among many questions: how and why do we choose to spend our lives, and why? This is one of the times when we actually have time to consider this. And so I'm going to focus my remarks on my choice of living out this major part of my vocation in the field of bioethics. But I should add to you that because of rules of confidentiality, I cannot share with you the substance of either any of the research protocols for review in my work in what is called the Institutional Review Board at Weill Cornell, or the contents of student essays that are part of the requirements in the Advanced Medical Ethics course, where I share small group teaching responsibilities with medical students and colleagues. I will, however, as we come to conclusion, share with you, with the author's permission, a part of a text now accepted for publication in the Journal of Religion and Health, where I am the editor-in-chief, whose relevance to this time of crisis will become altogether apparent. But now I'm going to take you back a few years, and I'm going to begin to discuss or move into our topic this way. In the order of the service for ordination of a priest in the Book of Common Prayer, the following of exchange takes place in the section devoted to the examination of the person to be ordained by the bishop presiding. The bishop says, and I'm sure you all know this well, "My brother, sister, do you believe that you are truly called by God and his church to this priesthood?" And the answer is, "I believe I am so called." And all of us who've gone through this or witnessed it understand it is a moment of truth, both somber and joyful. It is a rite of passage marking a transformation into a lifetime commitment. And the service outlines the tasks and the qualities of life necessary for fulfillment of this calling: honesty, responsibility, diligent study, and a loyalty to work with colleagues and those in authority for the common good. And interestingly, they resemble, both in tone, if not precise content, the gravity and solemn ritual significance of the contents of the Hippocratic Oath administered to those who are entering the calling and the profession of medicine. Now, I should tell you, I made the declaration, "I believe I am so called," on, would you believe, January 27th, 1973, in the church in suburban New Jersey where I was raised. At the time I was ordained, 1973, I was 26. The Episcopal Church had not yet ordained women, and not even the unofficial ordinations had taken place, and had yet to settle an ongoing and acrimonious dispute over its revisions of the Book of Common Prayer that we've now taken as the norm and all of you have used. And I should add, Richard Nixon was about to begin his second term as president, and the war in Vietnam, though beginning to wind down, continued to rage. Now, I should tell you, moving into this, that my call to the priesthood did not come clear to me all at once, and there had been no bolt out of the blue. I had no clue at the time of my ordination that I've just spoken of, the degree to which the efforts in medical education and ethics in medical research were to become central to my vocation. Now, I had no professional itinerary in mind. I could not imagine for the life of me, under any circumstance, being the rector of churches because I was resident in the Diocese of Newark, say in Short Hills or Summit, New Jersey. Now, I thought I would like to be a hospital chaplain, a role in which I excelled and felt at home during my seminary training, during which time I had accumulated over a year of clinical pastoral education in both general hospitals and mental health settings. This training, I'm sure some of you know, was a prerequisite for an appointment to such a position. And this goal did indeed become a reality as I spent 31 years of my career, now 47 years long, as a hospital pastoral care department head. First for 7 years in a state psychiatric hospital, the Toledo Mental Health Center, Toledo, Ohio, and then, as Peter has mentioned, for 24 years at New York Hospital, later New York Presbyterian Hospital, Weill Cornell Center, around where everyone lives in New York City. And this latter appointment, that is at Weill Cornell, became the site of my becoming involved in medical education and oversight of medical research. Now, all this began in 1990 with my being asked to become part of what is called the Institutional Board Committee on Human Rights and Research. More about that in just a moment or two. And later in 1993, when I joined the faculty of the second year course in medical ethics for medical students at Weill Cornell. Now, I know that my involvement in these activities became absolutely crucial for me. And the nature of my involvement calls to mind words attributed to young Martin Luther by his psychological biographer, Erik Erikson. And he says, quoting Luther, or ostensibly we believe it was Luther, "I did not learn my theology all at once, but I had to search deeper for it where my temptations took me." Well, my temptations, other than this path into the ministry, were convenient and, in fact, conventional. Now, I could have gone to law school and made a lot of money, or I could have gone to law school and not made a lot of money by becoming a beloved, respected, but underpaid attorney for the underrepresented, like my mother's father, for whom I am named. My other temptation was going to graduate school in English for a PhD. Now, I should tell you, I had obtained application materials my senior year in college from a variety of places, but look upon graduate study in English with a mixture of resignation and horror at the thought of spending several years trapped in a researching and writing a dissertation no one, including me, would be much interested in reading. More importantly, I knew I wanted to try something different, really different. And for reasons at the time I could not articulate at the time beyond words to the effect that I really have to try this. It was a bet I made with myself, and I think with the Creator. Now, I remember approaching my university preacher, university chaplain, what I recall was a particularly raw and bleak New England winter of 1968. And I informed him of my intention of going to seminary, and would he please write a reference for me. He responded with these prophetic words: "No matter what you do with your life, You will probably be beating your head against a wall, so the wall had better be worth it. No matter what you do with your life, you will probably be beating your head against a wall, so the wall had better be worth it. Now, I took these words to be good advice and have thought of them often. For both he and the rector of my home church strongly, and I mean strongly, advised that I attend Union Theological Seminary, believing it was the best place for someone with my needs and my temperament. I do believe, too, that vocation, however one conceives it, particularly in the helping professions, is profoundly shaped by early childhood experiences. One of the gifts I received from a childhood beset with illness was the capacity to be patient. Having spent hour upon hour in doctor's offices in both New Jersey and New York, and having been prohibited the freedom my peers seemed to have in abundance, I knew how to wait. I knew I had to do what I was told or suffer the fate of not having all that I felt I deserved out of life. And I knew that I would get well from the severe asthma and allergies that beset me and frightened my parents during one of my frequent attacks. I knew these cold, hard facts before the age of 10. And through these experiences, I developed what I later described as the faith of an idiot that had me believe that I would make it, get well, and join those whom I viewed among my peers as both lucky and normal. Well, the end is I did get well, though I later learned I was a very sick little boy whose clinical outcome was far from a sure thing. And I am certain that my protracted encounter with illness in childhood, as I've suggested, had a great deal to do with my later choice of ministry and hospitals. And outer history, indeed, has an impact on any major life decision. I was 6 at the time of the trials of the new Salk vaccine for polio, that I could not take part in them given my medical history. I was not permitted to go near the local swimming pool for several summers for fear of exposure in what turned out to be my first experience, though not my last, of living in the midst of time of plague. For this early experience awakened me to questions that would later occupy my professional life in the practice of teaching of medical ethics and in the provision of pastoral care. And they are questions that I learned, and in some of them at least, are the questions that patients ask themselves in the face of acute or chronic illness. Could I trust my doctors? What did I really understand? Were my parents and my sister all right? Who were these adults treating me? And were they able to tell me the truth about what was going on? I grew from an early age in my capacity to, quote, read, unquote, moods, to know when to relax and when to be on guard. And if you've had any experience of illness as a child, or you've taken care of children who've had protracted illness, their ability to read, understand a lot more than you may think they do, because those of us who've been in that experience can testify to that. But I have come to believe, however, that it was through some act of divine providence that both my pediatrician in the suburban town in New Jersey where I grew up, along with my allergy specialist, an emigre from Hitler's Europe, whose office was in fact not too far from St. Bart's, both had longtime associations with the then New York hospital, where many years later I have come to spend the largest portion of my professional career. I'm going to jump ahead now, but safe to say that I did have numbers of assignments as an interim in other places. One of the most significant one was the care of a congregation whose minister had died of AIDS in the early part of the pandemic, when fear and ignorance were at their highest level. This was a second experience of my life in plague time. But I should say on each occasion I served as interim, I did the work of a parish priest. I preached, celebrated the Eucharist, baptized children and adults. buried the dead, led vestry meetings, visited the sick, and taught confirmation. And so, in spite of how it might look, I never felt disconnected from the life of the church. But now let me tell you a bit about what it is, the Institutional Review Board, because it has some relevance to what we're going through now, because we're facing the fact of the amount of time, money, and energy that's being spent on research for finding some kind of viable treatments for COVID. Now, in my case, I was invited to join the Institutional Review Board, the Committee on Human Rights and Research at Weill Cornell in the 1990s. Now, the IRBs, people who oversee research, are federally mandated bodies responsible for maintaining ethical conduct in human subject research. And some of you may know this, that they arose in the wake of the Belmont Report of 1979 of the federal government, which had looked into and explored responses to the abuses revealed in the Tuskegee syphilis studies carried on since the 1930s under the auspices of the United States Public Health Services. Now, IRBs are instituted under the federal government and are not hospital bodies. They have, in theory and practice, considerable freedom and responsibility to ask questions, make recommendations, and approve or disapprove research studies. And their focus is, and always should be, first and foremost, on the protection of human subjects. They demand compliance with federal guidelines and hold first and foremost their obligation to what we understand as the doctrine of informed consent. Now, how did I get to do this? Well, the administrator in charge of the committee was looking for a replacement for its retiring clergy member, a professor at a local seminary who was moving into retirement. And a senior chaplain at the hospital at the time, I was in line to receive this appointment, as two of my predecessors had previously occupied this seat on the committee. Now, after my initial vetting and submission of my CV, I began to attend meetings. There was no formal training for IRB members at that point, and I listened for two of the monthly meetings and then received my first assignment to review of an initial submission for protocols. Protocols can be reviewed initially, or should be initially, and subsequently on a regular basis if there are to be changes or amendments, and as a way of keeping up and understand what is going on with them. Well, anyway, what did they give me for my first protocol to review? It had to do with sex education in urban teenagers. I have always wondered whether my identity as a clergy person had something to do with this choice, because as we all know, sex and religion always seem to go together or not go together, so maybe I was being hazed in some arcane manner. Well, anyway, what I said seemed reasonable enough, and as I suspected, I was not someone the committee felt I would feel uncomfortable with. So I'm going to talk about how the idea of my being a member of the IRB affected my own vocation. First of all, it asked me to serve as a peer with senior medical leaders. If you remember back on the vows that you take, it's to serve with people in authority and to do it for the common good. Second, I became familiar with the conduct and politics of research. Heavens forfend. Medical research, political. Most researchers, I would say, are altogether sensible, caring people who want to do the good of seeking after truth, aid in curing disease, while doing well or very well professionally. For after all, research is a high-stakes game. Tenure, money, grants, professional status, and faculty promotion are on the line. My awareness of these realities brought me back to my study of the theologian and ethicist Reinhold Niebuhr, whose delineation of the sin of pride and its relation to the power of self-interest are relevant here. For Niebuhr understood that democracy is highly imperfect and is, in fact, messy and flawed. It is, however, necessary to balance competing interests so to afford some measure of justice. Now, IRBs and the IRB I have been a part of arose out of a demonstrable need to oversee research and to indeed protect those who are the most vulnerable. And we have to look upon subjects or individuals who are involved in research as being among that cadre, among that cohort. IRBs contribute to a semblance of justice, and I believe at their best participate or reflect the democratic process. My service on the IRB took part in meetings on either monthly or bi-monthly basis, and engaged in research, all of the matters of research in medicine and psychiatry. For to read and then comment upon research protocols forced me to read the text with renewed acuity and vigor. And then I had to write, offer critique, and summarize in ways relevant to the task at hand. For I had to read with a sense of what was being said or remained unclear, even if investigators thought the material in the protocol was clearly stated. For how might potential subjects or their surrogates hear the words of a consent to participate document? Is it as fair as possible, clear and intelligent? What might be missing? For the issues involved in these situations are only heightened when dealing with emotionally and cognitively impaired persons or with children and adolescents. For informed consent can and should be reviewed periodically. It is ideally practiced as a process with an expectation of an ongoing dialogical component between investigator and subject. A subject may always go back and review this with the investigator doing the study, and is always open for question, reaffirmation, and review. I would say one of the things that provided for me, that helped me to become far more effective in any kind of analytical or hermeneutical task that I would find in theological and historical work, for having faced the challenges of protocol, review, debate, and discussion. But most importantly, and above all else, with the safety of human lives involved, this is not an academic and professional exercise alone, for these decisions affect lives in the real world. I'm now going to tell you a little bit about my experience in the teaching of medical ethics at Weill Cornell, some things that I've prepared for by my own personal study. I never had a degree in this. I learned it all from patients and by reading and by finding mentors and individuals to talk with. You now can get degrees and courses of study in seminaries and elsewhere, but I had to frankly learn how to do a lot of the academic side of it on my own, and I began that as part of the curriculum in 1993. And I was invited to do so by a physician colleague who has since gone on to head the Division of Medical Ethics. For students learn must, among other things, that patients, or persons, because patients are always persons before they're patients, sometimes act in ways that cannot be easily explained. It was for me a lot like learning again in yet another context some very basic things about the human condition. How do individuals make choices in the context of patienthood? They can make all sorts of rash judgments, disregard sound advice, and act contrary to their best interests. And they can also display, I should say, nobility, courage, mental and physical toughness, and undeniable resilience. And the same can be said of their loved ones as well. Now, I was the first non-MD and non-scientist to participate in the course as a seminar leader. And for each topic, there is an hour lecture followed by an hour of seminar. Students are expected to write 1 or 2 page analyses of assigned cases or cases that frankly arise from their own experience. Because as students go on, they learn a lot and they observe a great deal. And I am now very briefly going to share the topics covered in the most recent course in which I am now involved in the teaching of medical ethics. And this will be a very brief statement that I think you need to know, that when people study medical ethics, what in the dickens do they do? Well, this is the most recent course in several weeks in the spring. And it's meant to be on the advanced level, which means students by this point in their third and fourth years have learned enough to really make comments from their own experience. And I'm going to run through this quickly, and we may wish to address this in greater detail later. First, a patient's right to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment, a very difficult topic of when to go ahead and when to go forward. And the second topic has to do with whose autonomy are we talking about and the debates over futility. And I'm sure that you're quite aware, if you've been exposed to it, that it becomes very difficult if people want to go on farther or wish to select avenues of treatment that may or may not have any proven validity or therapeutic value. Third topic, organs to donate or not. Fourth, when incapacitated, that is, individuals who really can't understand very well what's happening to them, refuse treatment. Fourth, psychosis and autonomy, the ethical care of the patient with psychiatric illness. Next, ethics in clinical practice. And that was very interesting because what that had to do with last week with students brought observations of what I would call both the sublime and the anti-sublime of what they'd observed in their preceptors and the senior people who are educating them of ability to educate and help them understand what real professional practice is like in the area of patient care. Next will come ethical care of the dying patient. And last, a whole session on autonomy, that is choice in pediatrics, and whose decision is it anyway? Now, I should tell you, on the occasion of the beginning of my work with any small group, I am given to state the following. This is kind of my belief that going into this with students, and you can see if you agree with it. And I tell them words to this effect. In the words of William Sloane Coffin, former chaplain at Yale and anti-war and civil rights activist, said, "Ethics are more caught than taught. Ethics are more caught than taught." For your parents, brothers and sisters, other family members, your friends, your teachers, and religious leaders have already instilled in you by word and example what it means to be an ethical person. But what we can give you in this class is language, a framework and set of examples that can help you form and shape what is already there within you. Now, that's probably a large claim, but I sincerely believe that if people are given the fundament of instruction and a language and structure, they have the ability to do a lot of the kind of understanding and responsive work they will be called to do. Well, you might ask, in teaching medical ethics, what are the perspectives that I bring in my understanding? First, there is, in all these years, my firsthand knowledge of what patients say about what it means to be a patient, what they see, what they know and don't know, and what they want. Second, as is the case with virtually all clinically trained clergy, and I'm sure with the clergy in your church, I have an accrued knowledge of the dynamics of grief and mourning. Loss, of course, is central to the process of being ill, and it comes in a variety of forms, and virtually everyone, if they think about it, understands what that is. Third, it is important to help students explore some of what hope is for the critically or chronically ill person, to be able to both intuit it and to be able to understand it. What is hope's context? Where is it lost? And where may it be found again? Fourth, where is the family and others in all this? What are their narratives? My experience with the early phase of the AIDS crisis deepened my understanding of the complexity of family and intimate relations in the facing of what was for a time an almost certain death sentence. And what is a person or a patient's personal narrative have to do with the experience of being ill? Is there something in their life history that has to do with what they're going through in the current moment? And frankly, do they ascribe any meaning to it? Have they lost, recovered, or yearn for some sort of spiritual or religious grounding at these moments? And the meaning of covenants lost or sought can take on special meaning for those who feel guilt or estrangement, whether that be areas of covenants in marriage, covenants with family members, basically more than legal documents, but deeply held promises. And I find also that a tactful addressing of the meaning of suffering useful in taking care of all sorts and conditions of persons. That can obviously take on a variety of forms. Now, given what we're all going through, I'd like to spend a few moments on talking about what I would call the present hour. One way I have followed the professional path is through my editing for the last 10 years of the Journal of Religion and Health. Here's a little advertisement. See that? It really does exist. First published in 1961, we seek to address substantive issues regarding the dialogue among religion, spirituality, and health. And most recently, in the wake of the COVID pandemic, we have decided to formulate a special section of articles dedicated to describing the responses of religious communities and individuals of our country, and because we are an international publication in the world. Submitted articles are peer-reviewed, and not all submitted will be accepted, standard for any journal. In an editorial I wrote for the April issue, I put out a call for submission. And on April 7, probably a week before this appeared online, after it appeared online, I received the following essay entitled An Italian Experience of Spirituality from the Coronavirus Pandemic. And its author, Francesco Chirico, has given me permission to share it with you today. And in sum, it reminds us that that at this time, we all have to do what we can do. And now I'm going to share you a portion of what Dr. Chirico wrote to me, a man whom I've never met, but was responding to the call for papers. He writes, I live in Milan, Lombardy, the most affected Italian region by the current COVID-19 pandemic, and work as an official medical doctor for the Italian State Police. My wife is an emergency physician employed in one of the oldest hospitals in the center of Milan. We live with two lovely sons, Luca and Francesca, aged 12 and 9. I and my wife are both engaged in this healthcare emergency, though on two different battlefields. We are both Catholic, and in this extraordinary time, we are moving forward with faith and spiritual resilience by remembering that the Lord is our strength and shield. Psalm 28, verse 7. In Italy, many of us are infected, and as of April 6, 2020, a day before this was written, 80 medical doctors and 25 nurses have died. But today, inspired by your editorial, I'm not sure how much it did, but I'm glad if it did some good, we would like to commemorate the many Italian priests who have died in this tragedy. They worked tirelessly and without personal protective equipment to give spiritual assistance not only to the suffering people, but also to our patients and their families, as well to our colleagues who are now called healthcare soldiers in the global war against this vital threat. Dr. Chirico concludes this way. Now, we argue that spiritual skills for healthcare workers are even more important in a disaster scenario like this COVID-19 pandemic to relieve stress and psychic suffering of the same healthcare professionals, as well as of patients and families. For this reason, spiritual skills should be recognized as core skills for healthcare professionals and be implemented in all medical curricula. In this war scenario in which some of us get infected by COVID-19, and receive advanced respiratory support. We witnessed several religious conversions among our colleagues, which is probably the better scientific evidence. And the closer you are to death, the more you become closer to spirituality. For a believer, the best proof of the life-giving and invigorating power of the Holy Spirit does work better near suffering and death. For when all this is over, probably we won't be able to continue our job as before, because we all and those involved in the healthcare process will have learned an important lesson of prayer and spirituality from the coronavirus pandemic. This, of course, if you can itemize, is now my third experience of having been exposed to a life-threatening pandemic. I'm trying to find the final quotation here. And what I did was I wrote to Dr. Chirico asking whether I could give this presentation here at this church this morning. And what he said to me, he said, "Dear Professor Hart, very happy for this. I surely give you this permission." Good, okay. So Dr. Chirico writes, "Very happy for this. I surely give you the permission. I am happy and I hope that may be useful for the participants. I wrote this piece in the darkest hours of Milan, and writing and praying and sharing this battle with my wife and others were my power and the light to go through these strange days. Therefore, I am really happy to share it with you, your readers, and your city, this experience. Once again, thank you. With love from Milan to New York, yours sincerely, Francesco Chirico." As I said just a moment ago, at this time in history, we all do what we can do. So I think that concludes my comments, and I'd be pleased to answer questions such as we have time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kurt, for your reflections on your own experience and what we're going through now, and the connections between those things. We only have a few moments for questions. Please do send them through the live chat on YouTube, or you can email them to me at pthompson@stbarts.org. We've gotten quite a few questions already.
Okay.
Some of them, a number of them, focus on the role of clergy, particularly in the time of the pandemic, and specifically the hospital chaplain.
Yeah.
What kind of role can hospital chaplains have right now? And also, especially in this time where families can't be with their loved ones, do chaplains have a special kind of role?
Well, I would say this, since that there was a piece in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago, New Yorker, that had an illustration. And since I'm not on the front lines, but in a way, it's a modified form of what we've always done. First of all, it's an ability through using electronic means to communicate with patients, and then to make sure that they communicate with their family members. This is done through a variety of ways, and is illustrated in the things that are coming out. And also, there has a tremendous role to be able to be supportive of the caregivers, who I think you can see from Dr. Chirico's expression are very powerful, and they're very threatening. You only have to listen to the news on several occasions to be able to have a feeling of that. So I think it cuts both ways, and it requires really doing the work that one has done over time. one of the things that's different, and I learned first facing the AIDS crisis when we all had to put on, protective gear. It means that layer of difference from rather than being in your street clothes, uh, may feel like an air of degree of separation. But I think people have shown incredible amounts, what I've read and seen, of ability to transcend that, which says something about the power of presence to transcend a life-threatening situation.
Hmm. We have one question that asks, is there a time in which your mind has been changed about ethics, given your experience? When has your mind changed about what is ethical or not?
Oh yeah, I think one thing has to do with uh, I'm talking now more in a formal sense that for many years the discipline really said that the transcendent value had to do with autonomy and individual choice, self-determination, and that has a long history to it. But I've come in recent years to be much more interested and open to the impact of people's decision on, for example, the body, the common good of the body politic. Uh, and that's more in general. That represented something of a significant shift. And I've also seen my far more willing to understand the experience and the discipline as one that we share with other professionals. I think I'm going to keep it at that because I could go ahead for a long period, but I think because we have other questions, I'd keep it at that.
Hmm. A similar question asks what the most challenging time has been for you when you worked in the hospital setting. What was the most challenging situation in which you were in, especially dealing with doctors?
Oh, I think it was probably showing that I had something to offer, that we had something to offer, that it wasn't sort of an ancillary something on the side, but I had some sort of real dynamic relation, meaning to be part of the process. One of the things I didn't go into in the IRB is that when you sit in a big long table and you're the only one representing a profession, it means that you have to be able to come across with thoughtful commentary. And I think it's also the question of being persistent and not, taking anything that felt like rejection or repudiation, and understanding that both medicine and religion have had to overcome in the last 30 some years a lot of probably traditional anxieties and suspicions that one has had for the other. So having had a role in that and having been able to teach that and live that is probably, I would say, in general and in specific terms of doctors finding out after a while that probably I might have had something to offer and accepting that.
Hmm.
And also my not feeling any degree of superiority or triumph because this had happened.
Sure. And a final question, the last we have time for, involves the kind of question of quarantining, shelter in place, the trade-off in ethics between the health of the economy and the health of individuals.
Okay.
And,
so we're talking about politics. Yeah.
Well, yes, and specifically, not just within the United States, but also Sweden decided
to do one thing,
herd immunity. Any thoughts on decisions made along those lines?
Well, I think probably you can guess that I think we need to begin with what the science tells us and use that as the core experience of what it means to be exposed and then have it, be a vehicle of potential transmission. And I think it requires people to move away from, I would call it sort of a corruption of libertarian ideas that individual beliefs and really of what people are really the way to go, and that we all have to take a great deal of care in how we would think of our own individual behavior in terms of the common good and the larger and the body politic. I mean, that's what I would say, that how individuals deal with it, I think institutions deal with it. I think the fact that the church in this diocese has said we're closed up institutionally to when till July, I think has been an example of that kind of decision, and it's one that I heartily support. But I think that's the way I'd want to respond to that.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we have to stop there, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning, Kurt. It's been a joy to have you as part of Larry Wellborn's class on Wednesdays.
Oh, and thank you. Yes, indeed.
We're so glad that you've been able to spend this time with us this morning, and thank you for your years of service to the church and to the medical community.
Okay, well, thank you all very much, and y'all have a good day, and happy Mother's Day.
Yes, and those of you watching, I encourage you now to join us for worship at 11 a.m. Thanks a lot.